Between March and May 2021, researchers at the University of Wisconsin Center for Cooperatives set out to measure how cooperatives nationwide are approaching diversity, equity, and inclusion work. The survey asked 2 questions. First, researchers asked co-ops to reflect on their existing DEI practices at an organizational level. Second, they asked co-ops to identify areas to expand their DEI work and impact. Overwhelmingly, respondents said their co-ops value DEI work. The survey also found that DEI practices aimed at current and prospective employees are common. Less common and more unevenly carried out were DEI practices aimed at other stakeholders.
The survey that we conducted sets the stage for all cooperatives to benchmark their own organizational practices related to DEI, to identify areas for improvement, and to conduct their own surveys or DEI audits within their cooperatives that are better suited to explore experiences and individual perspectives.
Of the 140 co-ops that answered the survey, more than 50% of respondents said they would consider joining a more in-depth peer learning program. For the next 12 months, 4 separate cohorts set off on that journey.
People have started moving on this, coming together in cooperative ways to start their own journey towards a more racially inclusive approach to cooperation and to business.
It wasn't easy work, and there wasn't a roadmap to follow. But the cohort members were committed to transforming their co-ops and their communities. For cohort leader Faye Tate, the stakes were high and the goals were clear.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion drives growth. This work cultivates a sense of belonging. This work fosters more creative decision-making. This work mitigates sameness and complacency.
The cohort's work started with reading, writing, and reflection, the foundation for a bold, innovative vision around DEI practices.
We envisioned doing a lot of research, getting a lot of data, getting a lot of best practices in front of this group. This group was a terrifically quick study.
6 months in, the group decided to pivot from rhetoric to action. In a DEI landscape where talk can feel cheap, cohort members were hungry for concrete steps they could take to transform their co-ops and their communities.
And so the pivot that we made was an invitation to say, well, okay, the folks that we have here in this peer group, what would it look like to say, you've done a lot of reflection, you've done a lot of writing, what matters most to you? And more particularly, what levers of power do you have in your own context and with your own leadership to move the needle just a little bit in your space to achieve or move towards some of your goals in the areas of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice at your co-op?
For cohort lead Audrey Haskin, what mattered was inclusive governance support for small startups. She wanted to democratize leadership and decision-making at cooperatives.
If your board is composed of white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant men, that board does not look anything like me. So now how can we look like me? All right? It's a difficult question, and it deserves an answer. Because I am way cuter than that board that y'all are talking about.
Audrey and her cohort explored the possibilities around cooperative business policy structure.
What would really happen if we raised all people within our purview equal to the standing of our corporate leadership? What kind of world would that look like?
Turns out it looked a lot like Forkland Community Farmers, a cooperative in the tiny community of Forkland, Alabama, that emerged as a pilot project to put Audrey and her cohort's ideas into action.
But these are people who have known each other all their lives. They went to school together. Their kids went to school together. They attend the same church. They live in the same communities. They had never thought about going into business as a cooperative before they were approached by the Federation. Once we gave them the idea, they gathered up their resources and they took off. In fact, I had to catch up. I'm running, trying to catch up with these community farmers because they were ready. They were ready for somebody to come along and say, you can do this, let me show you how.
Another cohort lead, Layla Wolfram, also focused on support for startups. Her journey began in 2015 with the launch of Durham Co-op Market in Durham, North Carolina, the state's most diverse city.
We were pretty clear opening our store that opening a store that didn't serve our entire community would really be a failure of the definition of what a co-op really should be.
7 years later, Durham Co-op Market is thriving because it represents the diversity of the neighborhood it serves. But what about other co-ops struggling to meet the needs of their communities?
Right now, there are close to 100 co-ops in the organizing stages across the country, and many are trying to expand food access in low-income communities or to reclaim business ownership and control of capital in communities of color.
A successful food co-op takes an average of 8 years to open. Many never successfully launch. Others shutter quickly in the face of funding or operational shortcomings.
So I started to wonder whether there was some way that we could combine the innovative thinking and ambitious idealism of the startup community that could contribute new insight and invigorate the existing food co-op community, and that the existing co-op community could help reduce the risk faced by these startups by contributing some operational expertise and stability.
Layla's story doesn't have an ending yet, and that sense of uncertainty was shared by everyone in the cohort.
You might feel like this work is never ending, because it is. It is never ending work, but it is critical work. So persevere, get after it.
Sometimes even getting started can be overwhelming. That's what cohort lead Kim Christensen focused on.
A lot of boards don't work with these kinds of issues because they don't know where to start. And we all recognize that this can be a huge undertaking, but a board that doesn't know where to start is going to not start.
To jumpstart the work, Kim and her cohort developed a new toolkit.
The opportunity in this governance project is to create a toolkit with, say, 5 to 7 structural proposals for co-ops of any size, any shape, any ilk, to consider as first steps towards a broader DE&I and justice-oriented change within their organization.
Those steps include asking, does my board fully represent my membership, and how can we measure progress and hold each other accountable? Where Kim's toolkit focused on board engagement, Faye and her cohort considered an organization-wide DEI strategy. They modeled their strategy after Faye's work at CoBank, where creating a culture of DEI starts with listening.
We must create the brave and safe space to have these conversations. Allow your folks to share their stories. Allow your folks to ask those questions and listen to what is being said.
DEI work also means being flexible.
You know your organization's culture. You might have to go slowly, but that's okay. What you want is sustainability.
And sustainability takes commitment from everyone at an organization.
I think we all have to remember that we are all in this together, and together we will either fail or fly. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of partial to flying.